There is really no use of making another Nitpicks video because no matter how many times one can complain, things do not change. The show is still called Thomas and Friends, the Audrey stories are still unrecognized and not put into production, and no matter what, the inconsistencies are still and always will remain the same. Hit Entertainment acquired the Thomas brand in September of 2002 prior to the screening of the 6th series and filming of the 7th, with the goals of giving the series a massive overhaul and a rebirth. One can look at this as Hit Entertainment's way of making the Thomas brand their own. Seasons 8 and 9 of Thomas the Tank focus solely on Thomas and his pals, who all share a shed, rather than occupy their own lives and branch lines. Hit also changed the production values of Thomas with their new technologies of cameras, camera cranes, and CGI elements.
Hey, presto! Hocus pocus! Abracadabra!
The stories were also lengthened to 7 minutes and interactive segments were instated to allow the younger audience to interact with Thomas and his friends.
Really, Thomas? Go on, Percy. That's nice.
The overhaul has created some very mixed results. Because nitpicking is so easy, let us first acknowledge some of the problems and concerns with the rejuvenating of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends. We'll start out first with Season 8 and move on to Season 9. Season 8 of Thomas and Friends had good intentions. Hit Entertainment was really just trying to shape Thomas and make him their own. However, come Season 8, there were really a lot of inconsistencies and problems. For example, as Hit defined a character and their values, they neglected to keep such definitions consistent. Henry the Big Greed Engine can be defined as a hypochondriac with no real care for pulling coaches. However, in the one episode that he is given out of all of Season 8, his character is his real antithesis. In other episodes in Season 8, he is placed in the back and ignored. Edward's persona is a prime example of one of the biggest continuity errors of the series. In the more recent seasons, Edward's character has taken a turn for the worse. Every episode that he is the star of has him being very weak and very feeble, and always having to prove himself. Rarely do we actually visually see him with an expression that isn't pathetic, and he does not seem to be all-knowing anymore. He is no longer the wise old engine. He used to be the smartest member on the railway team and performed any task with little difficulty. Now, in the eyes of all of his peers, he is an incapable and inept bungler who is very pitiful and sorry. What I would suggest is that Hit place certain characters, like the 8 main engines, in some sort of Maslow's hierarchy, with certain needs. Henry would be the one to go into the safety category, whereas James could go under ego needs, Edward could go under the psychological branch with Toby, and so on. Considering that we are supposed to believe that Thomas and his friends work on the railroad, they, in fact, never seem to actually do any work. In both seasons, 80% of the time when I see an engine, they are traveling by themselves with no explanation given. Other times, all of the engines are together as opposed to being away and doing work. A long time ago, we believed that Thomas and Percy would go off during all hours of the night and carry the mail, and that every night Edward and Gordon would have a special express. However, all work on the island of Sodor seems to cease at 10 p.m., and all the trains are back at their sheds telling each other about their daily adventures. There also really ought to be more variety in the background traffic. I see no reason as to why Daisy or any other foreign engine cannot appear in the background, pushing or pulling a series of trucks, besides the possible reason that the producer is trying to implant more focus upon the 8 main characters, and make for a more centralized cast, which, in turn, both parent and child will become familiar with. However, if the concepts of a middle engine or a double header are now known to the fans, why not incorporate 1 or 2 into the background once in a while? The sole use of 8 characters, even being used as background characters at the expense of favorites with whom fans are familiar with, can prove to be quite tedious. While some characters are supposed to be temporarily gone but not forgotten, perhaps they should have been relegated to the background and filtered in and out as such when they were needed. While the main body of the stories went to characters such as Thomas, James, Percy, and for the sake of familiarizing herself with the audience, Emily, characters such as Duck, Oliver, and the Scottish twins could still have been prominent in the background with brief speaking roles, or just generally floating around and maintaining the industrial feel of the program. Whatever happened to the branch lines? Thomas, being the Fat Controller's personal lapdog, now does his bidding rather than running his all-important branch.
Thomas, I need you to go to the other end of the island and cure cancer.
A lot of the sets have the potential to be expanded and used multiple times, but, as is common in the world of cash cows, a new set could potentially lead to a new product, and that product could lead to profits for the company, so the introduction of certain one-time shot locales seems frequent. A lot of the sets also appear to have very little imagination. Instead of even attempting to recreate the old sets with some new appeal, we are treated to what constantly looks to be like 3 tracks running parallel through the countryside. On occasion, we'll see sets created for specific episodes complete with a kiddie theme, like an ice cream factory, toy factory, chocolate factory, and your occasional flour mill, but they are not generally needed more than a few times. Whatever happened to the giant freight yards filled with trucks left and right, ones where the camera could pan for a good 10 seconds before focusing on the main engine of the story? The only sets that appear to remain consistent are Tidmouth Sheds, Knapford, Maithwaite, the New Marin Station, and the one 3-railed strip of Brendam Docks where Cranky resides. Everything else changes frequently, which makes me question why the sets are so inconsistent when the set builders must have track plans, blueprints, and photographs to refer to. Sets should remain consistent and provide continuity to the series. If I see the suspension bridge and Mr. Jolly's chocolate factory, then I expect to see it over many times, and not only just in one season. I really do not like the feeling as if the crew created one set for one shot and then destroyed it to make something else. This adds to the suspension of disbelief. I must say, the actual naming of things is both a blessing and a curse. A blessing on one hand because now it establishes certain set pieces. In the stories and in seasons 1 through 4, everything was vague as to where exactly they were. Knapford was the big station, and Tidmouth Sheds was just the sheds. For Farquhar and Brendam were never mentioned by name, but finally we now have names like Brendam Docks, Drya, or Tidmouth Halt. It is also a curse because now there's an obligation, one for me to remember those sets, which makes me subconsciously realize that there are sets here built strictly for this episode that I'll never see again. Upon my remembering and taking in what the set looks like, any small variation that comes when the set is reintroduced automatically sticks out, for them to keep rebuilding those sets and use them over and over. The concept of this mysterious sort of railway line where stations can pop up out of nowhere sort of loses its value with the naming of certain stations.
And you'll see it tonight at Abbey Station.
You ought to work at Wellsworth Yard.
Murdoch passed through Marin Station. As Thomas returned to Tidmouth Sheds,
When Spencer pulled into Knapford,
Sir Topham Hatt came to Tidmouth Sheds.
Hit Entertainment's new seasons have a lot of emphasis on signals and junctions, which is a big change from the earlier seasons. However, a lot of the time I feel that the concept of the signal and the junction is just used as a water cooler-esque locale for the engines to talk and exchange news. Once all of the necessary dialogue is exchanged and exhausted, the signal obviously changes and the story continues. The point I'm trying to make here is that the railway realism is attempted at, but it just seems to be there in very small doses. Part of what made the Audrey stories so great was that they were based off of real-life events and occurrences. It would be nice to see the writers at HIT actually use real-life events and weave a story within it, not the opposite way around. As far as railway realism goes, there are many continuity errors between all of the seasons. There are events which contradict earlier episodes, as well as events that handle the operation of trains and transport very incorrectly. If Percy collects a carpet at the docks, there ought to be an explanation as to why it is not tied down. The people who work on the island of Sodor are not stupid. Farmer McCall is able to charter a train all to himself, running on the same track as others. Locomotives and railroads are usually focused on heavy industry, so it really seems quite unrealistic that after a storm occurs on the island, that Sir Topham Hatt would send all of his engines out for a whole day, strictly for collecting telephone poles and roof tiles. Isn't there other work that needs to be done? Aren't there passengers that need to go to the other end of the island? And what about the shunting of freight cars and coaches? And who in their right mind would authorize presents being transported in open freight trucks, fish in open coal trucks, cocoa powder in open coal trucks, and beach chairs and umbrellas in open wagons? By the same token of continuity issues, I question whether Gordon can actually get up his own hill or not, because he usually needs help, but in one particular episode where he finds that going slowly will prevent his demise, he crawls up his hill, requiring no help at all.
If I stop on this hill, I'll never get started again.
In fact, there is a great inconsistency in the amount an engine can pull or push. Long circus trains with endless amounts of cars can go up steep hills, but several freight cars filled with chickens, children, and sheep can wear an engine down a considerable amount. And a train filled with toys cannot climb a steep hill at all. There also seems to be the ongoing debate as to who has control, the drivers or the engines. Actions like thinking and talking and playing are human actions. Thomas the Tank Engine is not human, he is a machine. There are things he simply cannot do. Thomas is controlled by crew members. As far as we're concerned, all of the engines on the island are not self-driven, nor have they ever been. Regardless, the driver appears to be non-existent in Season 8 and only appears when there is emphasis on the interior of the cab. Please, find the answer and stick with it. Who's operating these locomotives, and why are the writers of the series being so complacent in their use of the drivers? Presuming that the engines do have these individuals working in them, why are they allowing them to travel in any direction, upon any route, or perform occasionally reckless actions of their own accord?
The drivers and station master agreed.
Next morning, Edward and Thomas asked their drivers, and when they said yes, Thomas ran off happily to find freight cars.
In some instances, such as in Thomas and the Tuba, when Thomas is allowed to run all over the island in search of a tuba player that they have left behind, and in the recent Henry and the Flagpole, when Henry is allowed to run across the island in search of a new flagpole for a castle, when in actuality, he should be taking workmen to work. Better communication among the writing team will be a must for the future, and the joint decisions they make should concern more than the catchphrases they commonly use, which brings me nicely to my next comment.
Thomas was as tired as he had ever been. His traction rods were rattling more than ever. This made Diesel crosser than ever.
Percy was as happy as he had ever been.
He was as dirty as he had ever been. Thomas braked as hard as he could. Spencer took off as fast as he could. Thomas raced as fast as he could. Thomas and his freight cars were dirtier than ever.
But Thomas kept going as fast as he could.
Percy was working as hard as he could, and he puffed back to Tidmouth Sheds as fast as he could. If this was his last trip, he was going to go as fast as he possibly could. I thought this was the most wonderful special delivery ever. So Thomas raced as fast as he could. The furniture felt heavier than ever. Thomas puffed as fast as he could.
My last nitpick here would have to be the one that is carried over since my earlier video, the redundancy of the vocabulary. If Hit Entertainment is trying to take and make Thomas their own, then why can they not expand the vocabulary? I could see if the reinforcement was necessary if
Confusion and delay.
Confusion and delay.
Confusion and delay.
Confusion and delay. Confusion and delay.
Confusion and delay.
Confusion and delay.
Confusion and delay.
Confusion and delay.
Confusion and delay.
Confusion and delay.
Really useful engine.
Really useful engine. Really useful engine. Really useful engine. Really useful engine. Really useful engine. Really useful engine.
A really useful engine.
Really useful engine. You really are a useful engine. Very useful engine indeed.
as well as
Luckily, no one was hurt. Luckily, no one was hurt.
Luckily, no one was hurt.
No one was hurt.
were slogans for the brand or the product, but instead these phrases seem to have lost all value. Back in earlier seasons, the main goal of any engine, especially Thomas, was to be deemed a really useful one. What made the earlier seasons so wonderful is that we witnessed the progression of Thomas from the immature little tank engine to a really useful maturing locomotive. The term of being really useful was roughly the equivalent of receiving a gold star sticker on a test. The engines had to work at acquiring the title. Nowadays, the term is used loosely, as if Sir Topham Hatt was just giving the title away. Every single engine does not need to be on equal footing. There are so many ways to commend someone for doing a wonderful action. Nitpicks aside, Hit Entertainment knows where to draw the line. Once in a while, something nostalgic will pop in, such as a reference to Edward being a back engine, one of Henry's old faces, or that old Gordon model which we always see puffing away from us in the distance. Even the old set of Farquhar Station has appeared again, although it is at approximately 1 or 2 seconds of any real airtime. Hit has pulled some of these things that old fans love to see out of the closet. It would just be so nice to see them more often. Hit stands far enough behind their product that they were able to make Calling All Engines, a 30-minute special devoted to Thomas and his friends. This proved out to be a real treat not only to fans, but to the youthful audience it was created for. Once again, there was friction between the steam engines and the diesel engines, although my only qualm, and this is emphasized in the last Nitpick video, is that the antagonizing of the diesels is not as strong as it used to be. However, in Calling All Engines, we see the engines with attitude. Hit also has finally answered the calling of returning the old and classic models of Rusty, Lady, and Daisy to the scene. Paxman, aka Derek, also has one brief cameo in a music video. Such cameos can only make one hope that Hit will keep these characters around and allow them to come back to the series. Many people complain that there are far too many characters and locations in the series that have not had enough emphasis, but the truth of the matter is that the introduction of new characters follows the same mentality of creating new locales for the island. Let's say that a new character is introduced, and to make such a character for the series costs about $10,000 in American money. To take into consideration that the character will be turned into a $10 learning curve model, a $6 take-along model, and eventually, hopefully, a $5 Ertl model, and bought by millions of consumers, you can automatically see how the $10,000 that the television series model costs is easily reimbursed. The same rule applies to certain locations. If a toy factory and dairy are introduced, then there is sure to be a toy factory as well as a dairy learning curve model expected in the near future. However, that said, within Season 9, no proper character development is given for the 4 new engines. They are each given one episode and never seen or mentioned again, besides in the background shots if they're lucky. And, despite the fact that there is a 26-episode limit, there could have totally been room for these characters to provide a fuller explanation for who they are and to help viewers familiarize themselves with them. Otherwise, the plots for the stories they are involved in are redundant and could have been given to another character, namely an existing one the fans are familiar with. The fact of the matter is, Season 8 saw no new characters being introduced by way of a new policy by the producers in a bid to give focus upon the existing ones. And if new characters are going to be brought in, there should be a greater focus put upon them. Otherwise, there's another 4 useless models. Truthfully, though, the characters are interesting, full of variety, and it would be lovely to see them more in seasons to come. Having watched all of Season 9, I can safely say that Thomas is in good hands, but is still in his early stages. If the engine learns something, it appears to be very brief and does not necessarily have to be the point of the episode, although in some of the episodes the moral is bluntly stated at the end.
In future, Thomas decided he would believe in himself, but they both agreed, even when it's hard, it's always best to tell the truth.
I will know to think clearly all the time.
Working with your friend is the best job of all.
This time it really feels like Hit Entertainment is having fun. The new characters are fun to look at, and despite the fact that they only have one episode, one can get sort of the premise as to their true personality. Each of these characters has the potential to become well-rounded members of the Sodor crew, as opposed to just another one-hit cameo toy on the shelf. Truth be told, there is way too much emphasis on the lead tank engine. Not every episode requires Thomas to appear. Thomas has learned so many times not to rush. In Fish, Thomas tries his best, as well as Thomas gets it right. Although the other 7 engines are given at least one episode for themselves, the one episode seems to get inundated in all of the Thomas-based episodes. This, in turn, does not seem to be enough time for the characters to fully shine. It has great intentions, and it is so nice to see our old favorites returning, but their frequency is very low. One minute suggestion that I would love to make for the future seasons is that, as far as expansion and diversity, break from the railroads once in a while. The island of Sodor is not entirely covered in railway lines. Road characters such as George, Caroline, Bertie, and Terrence have not had any time in the spotlight. Our forgotten road vehicles deserve a little recognition. Sir Topham Hatt also could use a little bit more character. He cannot simply stand as the authoritative figure, running around and reprimanding the engines. Why not let him have some fun, like maybe acquire a toupee, or enter a vegetable contest, or just go on vacation? In fact, the whole premise for Toby's existence as a cast member was built upon how Sir Topham went on vacation, leaving his personal little railway behind.
He's away for a week. Oh,
Where's Percy?
In respect for Gordon, Sir Topham Hatt is nowhere to be seen, despite the fact that insurance rates probably went through the roof, and all the wasted jelly costs money, as well as the payment for the salvaging crew. Gordon is not reprimanded at the end of the episode. Whether intentional or by accident, the lack of the scolding is actually very relieving. Season 9 also brought about the return of the narrow-gauge engines. To be honest, they have changed so much as far as locations, models, and credibility that I haven't missed them. They either need to be reverted or else they need to be scrapped altogether. Despite the planned return of Sir Handel, the cast has been cut down, the original models have been shelved away, and the sets fluctuate so much that it is impossible to spot any truly consistent sets since the original introduction of the small-gauge engines. The stories are merely okay, and I'm not going to complain about Rusty's gender change because I don't particularly care. A possible explanation for it could be the fact that the TV series now being created has forked away from its original book roots, not only ignoring the family who created and developed it, but also now its traditional characters.
What's this? Educating Gordon Day? First James, now you, Duck. Big engines have big needs. Little engines are just annoying.
HIT can do whatever they would like, but the small-gauge engines have gone beyond the point of ridiculous changes. You can look at Season 8 as a testing phase, with HIT Entertainment walking atop of eggshells. The crashes in Season 8 were focused on trucks only, with the exception of Gordon running through the station and into a snowdrift with the Express, and the only incident with an engine derailing was concealed. According to BBC News, crashes in Thomas are controversial and can scare children. Following Season 8, Season 9 is not afraid to have its trains derailing, which is actually a relief. However, the crashes are still a little tame and do usually occur a good distance away from the camera and are placed in slow motion for dramatic effect. And there's always some gratuitous explosion for some unknown reason. It's a bold change from Season 8 with its limited crashes, and it works really well. Another plus for HIT Entertainment is the introduction of a narrow-gauge controller into the series, someone who was ever present in the Railway series but sadly was not introduced with the narrow-gauge engines back in the 4th season. The incorporation of Mr. Percival does give a little realism to the narrow-gauge system, rather than having Sir Topham Hatt being the unquestionable Lord, God, and Master of the Sodor universe.
You have caused confusion and delay.
It is easy to turn around and complain about every minute detail, but HIT has done a lot of work with trying to bring Thomas into the new generation of youth-oriented programming. The least we can do is show them our gratitude for taking our favorite show and trying to make it better, as opposed to pointing our fingers at them and blaming them for every problem that we have. Although I feel very aware that I am watching model trains run around on model tracks, I'm not entirely certain if this is because of the color scheme, camera work, or the change in narration. Season 9 is a vast improvement over Season 8. As time progresses, maybe we can all help to make the series better, because there is always room for change. However, change will not come about unless one has the capacity to act. I implore you, write letters, write essays, mail HIT Entertainment. Just do something. Inform them of your concerns, but do not forget that they run the show, literally, and it would not be wise to bite the hand that feeds you.